Welcome to All About the Feels, the podcast where we share real stories, expert insights, and practical strategies for families, educators, and anyone navigating the complex world of sensory needs. I'm your host, Robin Heidelberg. Whether you're seeking understanding, support, or just a place to feel seen, you're in the right spot. So let's explore the ups, downs, and everything in between together. In this episode, we are shining a spotlight on one of the most important and sometimes overlooked parts of sensory processing, the visual sensory system. We'll explore how the visual system works, how sensory processing disorder, or SPD, can affect the way people see and interpret the world, and most importantly, practical strategies and supports to help those who experience visual sensory challenges. So first up, let's just discuss what the visual sensory system is and like how our eyes and brain work together, because if we discuss that and understand that, then we can go into a deeper understanding of why people with SPD struggle, and then we can go through strategies on how to help them who struggle. So our visual sensory system is more than just seeing and using our eyes to see clearly. It's about how our eyes and brain work together to interpret the world. So the system can help us read or catch a ball or find objects or even navigate through a crowded room. The eyes take in light and images, but your brain does all that heavy lifting. It does the processing, the organizing, and the making sense of what we see. This process is closely linked with our other senses like hearing and balance to help us move safely and confidently through our environment. But think about what happens when that system doesn't really work as expected. For those with SPD, the brain has trouble receiving and responding to those visual information, so that makes everyday experiences overwhelming or even confusing. So let's talk about how SPD can affect the visual system, because there's more ways than you would think. And there are going to be some red flags that might indicate that you have a visual processing challenge that could be linked to sensory processing disorder. If you have a sensitivity to light, or you're easily distracted by visual stimuli. So if a room feels overwhelming because there's a lot going on visually, that could be a red flag. Or frequent squinting, rubbing your eyes, or headaches after visual tasks. So if your eyes have to do a very hard, heavy task visually, and then you get a headache after that, or you're having to squint or rub your eyes, that could be a red flag that you have some visual processing difficulties. Trouble finding objects, even when they're in plain sight, right there in front of you. Like the story in our first episode when I said, I should know better. My son can't find things that's right there in plain sight in front of him. That is a red flag, and that's one of his big issues. Difficulty with eye contact or visually demanding activities like reading, puzzles, or mazes. Even like think about word searches. All of that can be overwhelming. Challenges with handwriting, such as letter reversals or poor spacing. Frequently losing place when reading, and bumping into things or hesitancy on stairs, because looking down, that can be overwhelming, that it feels like the stairs are far away. Those challenges can impact schoolwork, social interactions, or even your self-confidence. So think about visually stimulating environments like classrooms or playgrounds. Those are going to be overwhelming to anyone with visual processing difficulties. So let's insert some of stories and experiences about my son. So my son has more visual processing than I even realized before I took a sensory class. I did a sensory training through some OTs, and I learned a lot. So when my son was about 5, we thought he had depth perception issues because looking down on the stairs and going up and down the stairs was overwhelming to him. Escalators were freaking him out. And so we were worried that like he didn't know the depth perception, and like that was affecting his ability to move through his environment. Little did I realize his depth perception has come back perfectly fine at the ophthalmologist, and he now sees an ophthalmologist every year. But it is because he has trouble visually processing things. His brain doesn't process well. He struggles extremely in reading. He's very behind in reading, and he loses his place when he's reading, and he is one that's stubborn and doesn't want to use his finger. And even though I'm a teacher, I'm like, put your finger down, put your finger under your word, and let's use it to help you track. I did find a little reader tracker thing on Amazon that we're going to try to see if that helps. But him losing his font in reading, it happens all the time. And our district does a reading test 3 times a year where he has to sit and read for a minute to see his fluency for oral reading fluency and how many words he can read in a minute. And that stresses him out, not only about the timer, it adds anxiety, but like looking at the words and visually seeing that whole story that he's got to read is too much. So we can put a blank piece of paper on top of the story so that he's only focusing on one line at a time. And that can lessen the visual overwhelmness in that moment. He definitely is a kid who rubs his eyes and does not like bright lights. I've told the story that I should know better to say, hey, Camden, go find your shoes. And he can't find his shoes if he didn't put them back in our shoe basket because they're probably right there in front of him. But he will walk in a room and go, I don't see it. I don't know where they're at. And then he starts stressing and freaking out. And it's only because he visually cannot handle any objects in a room and have to find it. It could be right there in front of his foot. It could be right there in front of his face. He's not going to find it because he feels overwhelmed visually right when he walks into a room. Challenges with handwriting, letter reversals. He doesn't do that too much. He does have moments of that. Poor spacing. Spacing is so hard for him when he's writing a sentence, and that definitely falls into the visual difficulties. Difficulty with eye contact or like reading puzzles and mazes. I mean, he can be overwhelmed by a puzzle. And so there's a lot going on. And if he's dysregulated, those are going to flare up and those are going to show even more and maybe even cause a meltdown. So I've experienced, watching my son go through all of this, and like I've had to come up with ways to incorporate activities into his daily life or his weekly life that really hone in on those skills of helping him visually so that he gets less overwhelmed. So some way we're going to now go into let's find some ways that we can support visual sensory needs. So how would I support Camden so that he is doing less of that? Or how can I support a student in my classroom? So maybe these things will help you. You can encourage activities that develop visual tracking, like catching a ball. He was horrible at catching a ball for a very long time. So that was something that we would practice. He didn't realize that we were practicing on visual sensory. He just thought we were playing with a ball because he loved balls as a little kid. Puzzles or I Spy games are great ways to also incorporate the visual tracking. Using routines and visual schedules that help provide predictability, can definitely be helpful. You can create sensory friendly spaces by minimizing clutter and using calming colors. So if you're a new teacher and you're thinking about creating your classroom, you really need to think about calming colors and not putting up as many things. I know we are all bad about all the resources we need to give kids and all the things we got to put on the walls, but we really do need to keep it to minimize the visual overwhelmness for any students that could have visual sensory needs coming into your classroom. So it's funny. Every year now I've been trying to take more and more off my walls or take less and less away to help reduce the overwhelmed clutter feeling or the visual overwhelmness for students. You should allow breaks for visually demanding tasks. So if you know that like reading a long reading passage is going to be overwhelming, when they're finished, they need a break from the visual. They need to do something that is not going to be visually overwhelming or using their eyes for a very long time so that they get that break from it and then they can go back to doing another task. Dimming the lights. I am thankful that I am in a school that our classroom lights are dimmable because fluorescent lights are bright, and I know that, and I get a lot of students that have sensory needs into my classroom, and my everyday task is when I walk in, the first thing I do is dim my lights because the custodian brightens my classroom back to its full brightness when he is vacuuming at the end of the day. So I have to make sure I dim them back down in the morning when I come back in. And I've also added like lamps or house lamps throughout the classroom so that I can make the bright lights that are above our heads a lot more dim. And I can add some of those softer lights into the classroom to allow the kids to not have such a bright room that they feel calmer and they're visually not overwhelmed in that moment. And as always, going to occupational therapy can always help any sensory needs. But also it's kind of nice to have like a quiet space that's quiet in the sense of visuals. Maybe your house has a lot of things in it, or maybe your classroom has a lot of things in it, but like you could create a space where a student can go into that and just, it's plain. There's not a lot of visual things around. So one way would be like having like a teepee tent, or I mean, they make those all the time, or like some kind of little nook or a designated space that they can go sit for a moment and they can look around and not see a bunch of visuals. There's not a lot of posters. There's no decoration. It's just very plain. And they can just have that calming moment to like take some deep breaths and relax before they go back out into the classroom and have to continue working in an overwhelming visual room. So those are some great strategies, but sometimes you have under-responsive children. That's more for like the over-responsive kids because they are overwhelmed. They have that heightened sense because it's too much and it's a lot. So now let's talk about the under-responsive kids. Sometimes you have to increase the visual cues. Sometimes you have like kids that need colored tape to mark boundaries, or you need to highlight important areas on a worksheet or organize their belongings. Colored overlays behind a worksheet or highlighted writing lines can help them draw attention and support focus to a specific area. Sometimes like they struggle seeing what they need to see. So you put a piece of like cellophane type transparent but colored on top of an area that you want to emphasize. You might need to use visual schedules or aids, like they need charts or they need picture cues. They need help with transitions, routines, or comprehension. And what I find ironic is my son falls in both categories depending on what it is. He needs those visual schedules. He needs help with transitions and routines and comprehension, but he also doesn't like bright lights and he can't handle too much on a page. So he is literally both sides of this, and there is no craving. He is not a sensory seeker when it comes to visual. And I really think it is really important to make sure like you have things like puzzles and I Spy games or word searches, just because it's something fun to do. I've also done some things to like help with his tracking. I have taken tape or, like painter's tape or any colored tape, and I have made like a pattern on the floor or the wall, and I've had him take a weighted ball and he has to roll the weighted ball into that, following that path. And because he's practicing and I switch up the path, it's helping his eyes visually track the way that the ball is going, so that will carry over to when he's tracking and reading. So, I mean, there are things such as vision therapy that optometrists and ophthalmologists can do if like your child really needs it. There's OT and there's sensory diets, which way later, once we discuss all of these senses in more depth, I have a whole podcast episode coming on sensory diets and what they are and what you can do. But like I said, with the weighted ball, it's that nice heavy pressure that he likes because he has to move it, but it will help with the tracking of reading. And so that you have to be consistent with that. And so that's one activity you could do to help with that. At home or even school supports, some practical ones that you could do is reducing glare by like using window shades or moving desk away from direct sunlight. Provide sunglasses for outdoor or bright environments. Like if your child is struggling with that, give them a pair of sunglasses. You can go to the Dollar Tree and get some cheap sunglasses, and that will help them with the brightness. Make sure colors and patterns are not overwhelming. So like if you're decorating your child's bedroom or even a classroom, don't use like busy wallpaper or rugs or bedding. Use something that's calming, solid colors. Blue is a very calming color. You could use that. And like I said, you could use colored tape or contrasting colors to mark door frames or steps if they're having trouble with the spatial awareness and navigating things safely. And obviously, when it comes to eye contact, like don't force them to constantly always like give me eyes or whatever. Sometimes they need that. Maybe you just need to listen and engage in a way that feels comfortable for the child. So they may not be giving you perfect eye contact. Let their eyes go where they need to so that they're not overwhelmed. Sensory bends and Play-Doh can always add a visual and tactile input. So like that's a good thing that you're combining more than one sensory system into one. So like you're kind of doing you're getting a 2-for-1 deal there. But like sensory bends, you could put colorful materials. Like some people dye rice. Some people put like different colored beads in them, or Play-Doh, or the kinetic sand, things like that. And we use like tongs or spoons and like different containers and cookie cutters. And I mean, we could go on, and maybe I'll do a podcast on sensory bends because we could talk forever for that. But that would be a good thing to do. Some visual fidgets and toys like rain sticks or glitter tubes. Those are usually calming visually. So, I mean, there are a bazillion on Amazon, and if we need to get you some links, we can. Just let us know. But basically, when you could make them with like cornstarch. No, not cornstarch. Oh my goodness. Corn syrup and water and glitter in a bottle, and you hot glue the bottle closed so it doesn't leak. Like if you turn it up, you can watch the glitter fall, and like the corn syrup is thicker, so it moves along. You could even dye that a different color, but they make them on Amazon too, and you can find them in other places. But like just sitting there looking at that can be visually calming for the child. Obviously, you need to work closely with any OTs that are working with your child, educators. Like if you're as a parent doing something at home and it's working, and maybe reach out to their OT if they have OT. If they don't have OT, maybe reach out to their teacher. If you can be consistent across the board in their life, then it's going to be helpful, and it's going to help them be successful in all aspects of their lives. So Obviously, if you can, involve your own child with it too. If they get to choose and the colors of different things, or they get to choose what activity, if you give them a couple choices, they're going to be more willing to do it, more willing to be involved, and it's going to make them feel comfortable, and it's probably going to be more effective for them. So involve them as much as you can. And obviously, the more individualized you can make it and the more consistent you can be, the better help children and adults are going to have with SPD. And then they can navigate their environment more comfortably and confident if you are using strategies to help them build their visual sensory system so that they're not as overwhelmed. Because if you are giving them the supports they need and they're less overwhelmed, everything's going to be calmer, everything's going to be better, and things are going to go smoother. And I know it's hard. I know it takes a lot of time. And I know sometimes you're just exhausted as a parent or an educator and you feel like you don't have enough time. But take baby steps. Do something small first and then work your way up to maybe making a sensory bend or, just the simple thing of giving them sunglasses could just minimize something and make it less overwhelming for that moment. And if they're having trouble at recess, maybe see if the teacher will let them wear their sunglasses at recess. And I bet you they'll be calmer coming in. That's one little thing that could cost $1.25 at the Dollar Tree. And that could save one meltdown during the day. So don't feel like you have to start big and start with all the things. Start with one little thing and then build on it. It takes time. Don't stress yourself out. Don't make it harder. Try baby steps. Trust me when I say that. Okay, well, overall, after my little rant about starting small, we've talked about the visual sensory system and how it's super complex. And SPD can totally make the world feel unpredictable and overwhelming just by that one sensory system. So if we all understand, we support, and we get the community involved of whoever's in the lives of the child or adult with SPD, then maybe those challenges can be a little bit more managed, and sometimes they can be turned into strengths. So I hope you enjoyed today's podcast, and I hope you continue to join us, and we will see you again on All About the Feels. Stay tuned for more stories and strategies to help anyone thrive with SPD. Have a great day. Thanks.